story of the 12th return to life before the divorce from the son of a famous swindler. Open neck and shoulders, necklace with large purple stones in the frame. The view opens to the main character's chestnut hair, decorated with green leaves. The girl captivates with her appearance, complex hairstyle, and masterpiece dress decorated with fresh roses. The phrase she hears, the landscape, the scent, the sensations, all of this has happened more than 10 times already. And again she experiences the same day, which repeats itself over and over again. Madame Roussel is again called by the butler Lorenzo with a request to come to the office. Freya immediately goes to the mirror and carefully examines her unchanging image. The heroine looks at her reflection with an empty gaze. She wants to change her face, her hairstyle, into which she put a lot of effort, but there is no time for it. Roussel, turning away from the mirror and its unsightly reflection, immediately moved into her husband's office. She, illuminated by the light and shine of her jewelry, wanted only one thing. She wanted to live this 12th life only for him, her beloved husband. A man's hand, holding an elite stationery, was writing something on a document. Mrs. Freya confidently walked into the office and called out to her husband, who was busily occupied with paperwork. The heroine called out to her husband, trying to attract his attention and force him to stop what he was doing. Max reluctantly tore himself away from the papers and looked sternly at Freya. "The month has surely passed," said the stately man, pointing to some discord between the heroes. The lady looked silently at her husband, awaiting further action and an irreversible conversation. He tried to avoid contact with Freya, spending all his time away from home, but today there was no escaping the conversation. The heroine sat quietly, expecting the same conversation that had happened all the previous 12 times. Mr. Roussel felt that something had changed in Frey, but he could not understand what exactly, and this worried him. Before him is not the same person as before, but a vulgar image, a complicated hairstyle, rough makeup, and heavy perfume. Max doubted that maybe he himself had changed, but today it didn't really matter. "Freya," he called her name, collecting his thoughts and looking straight into her eyes, to which the girl interrupted him, because she had already heard this dialogue and remembered every word he said. Max was puzzled by his wife's behavior. He was haunted by a strange feeling of alienation towards her. The lady looked at her husband with her large emerald eyes, waiting for the dialogue to continue. Freya was usually always seething with anger, either desperately clinging to something or simply going crazy. She was obsessed with her husband, that was her sentence. Max nervously tapped his hand on his pants leg, suspecting that she knew something and that was why she was acting like this. Even if so, it wouldn't change anything, he thought. There was no retreat. Freya had been a bride for 10 years, married for 5 years, but all these years the master had wanted to say one phrase to her. "Let's get a divorce," Max said nervously, imagining how the mistress would be hysterical. But nothing happened. Freya silently pondered her husband's proposal. The man didn't understand what was happening. He couldn't believe his eyes. The heroine sat calmly and looked back. Max asked why she was silent. Did his wife really think that he was not serious? Freya refuted his assumptions and, citing her complete trust in her husband, agreed with his choice. "Yes, go ahead," she said quite calmly, "but in 2 years, and keep everything a secret." Mr. Roussel was shocked by his wife's behavior and was unable to maintain a straight face at the time of the incident. The heroine broke into a sweet smile, closing her eyes. Freya was the only daughter of a great family, in whose veins flowed the blood of the old dynasty that had survived all the upheavals. Max, the grandson of the revolutionary hero who overthrew the monarchy. But their marriage turned out to be unusually scandalous. The guests constantly smiled and clapped their hands, covering up smirks and whispers. Only the dazzling bride in a luxurious snow-white dress covered with flowers did not notice this. On the day of his daughter's wedding, the Duke of Blanc, a stately man in an elegant suit, splashed out generously on the celebration. The heroine thought about all the difficulties they had experienced before her main celebration. But now their happy beginning of life together with Max has arrived. Now the prince and princess will live happily ever after, Freya thought, and she couldn't help but smile widely. Luxurious dark brown hair is combed with a white brush with a golden emblem of the Roussel family crest. The red-haired maid, carefully combing the heroine's brown hair, notes that her mistress is in a good mood, to which Freya asks if it is so noticeable. Mila agreed with the lady, because today she looked much better than usual, but Russell had a poor memory of what had happened before yesterday. The red-haired girl asked how long the gentleman would stay at the estate this time. Max was very busy with business, and yet he came home to announce the divorce that he had been planning and wanting to implement for so long. Her husband would spend at least another week at home, Freya replied, which pleased the maid, who suggested they celebrate their anniversary together. For Mila, yesterday's silence meant a lot, because for the last 2 years there had not been a day without the spouses arguing, but this silence was due to Freya. Having finished working with her hair, the maid suggested sorting out her wardrobe. The heroine, after some hesitation, agreed to this event. They headed to the dressing room, where all of the ladies' dresses, which had been accumulating for several years, were kept. Opening the closet, their gaze was met with incredibly beautiful clothes, woven by the estate's first-class craftsmen. Freya doesn't like all the outfits. She considers them tasteless and showy. They should have been shown to Madame Parnell and sold. The lady ordered to leave a couple of modest outfits and pack away the rest of the flashy bad taste. These dresses were the result of stubbornness, an attempt to catch Max's eye. Freya did not want to leave this trash. She also refused to call expensive tailors, citing a walk through the shops and rows of the city. Mila happily accepted this idea and invited the heroine to the passage that had recently opened near the Louvre. The lady said that we could go into the Pranthon, but she immediately came to her senses, because he wasn't there yet. Footsteps and a knock were heard from behind the door. The butler said that the heroine's name was Madame Roussel. She remembered that it was time for Matilda to call her to the banquet hall. There were 2 Mrs. Roussels living in this house, and as soon as they were in the same room, the girl from Mrs. Roussel became Mrs. Freya. Upon arrival in the hall, the steps of servants trying to please their mistress could be heard. As soon as Freya came in and asked why she had been called, Matilda asked her to come and have some tea, which the servants had already gone to get. Our Lady stood quietly, remembering all the scandals and humiliations that had occurred because of Matilda. The address Lady Freya was not an indication of her family title, but rather a humiliation, as if she were a streetwalker. The mother-in-law stood with a sarcastic expression on her face, anticipating an imminent scandal, and sipped tea from a cup decorated with a gold ornament. When Freya turned 20, whose first and last kiss happened at a wedding, she could not stand it when she heard such an address and ran out of the room. These words struck her straight in the heart, and she simply could not react differently. She understood that in those years she was small and stupid, and her sincere feelings were destroyed by the pressure of Madame Roussel. Freya refused tea, to which Madame Matilda voiced this wish to the servants. The courtiers were unable to contain themselves in anticipation of a new scene. Tension filled the room at that moment. Everyone was anticipating Freya's next move. "What business did they call her for, Madame Roussel?" asked the main character. Madame Matilda was puzzled by this, because after the wedding no one contributed to Freya's final madness as much as she did. The girl sat down on the yellow sofa, waiting for her mother-in-law's answer. The lady began by saying that Max had taken over her husband's business, and the family's position had strengthened. Then there was a request for help with opening a salon. Freya said that it might be difficult, to which the lady was taken aback. The heroine explained that if the lady opens a salon under her own name, then it should be done from personal funds. Madame objected. Did 2 people in this house bear the name of Madame Roussel? Perhaps Freya was refusing because a couple of jokes had been made at her expense. Matilda was offended to hear this. Were they really on cold terms with her? Maybe she should turn to Max, since the girl did not want to help her. Freya understood all this perfectly well. Matilda always did this to provoke a scandal. The lady manipulated the girl all these years the way she wanted. The heroine asked to contact her husband to resolve the dispute between them. Madame Roussel was confused by the girl's behavior at the beginning of their marriage. She followed Matilda as if she were her own mother, but very soon she realized what she really was like. And although Freya saw evil intent in her mother's behavior, she endured it, hoping to win Max's favor. But she didn't understand that such behavior disgusted her husband. The girl remained silent and waited for a reaction from Matilda, but she didn't want to delay for long. Freya said that it would be better to discuss this with Max, since he is the head of the family and manages all the money. Matilda always pretended to give advice, but in reality she pushed people towards misfortune. The lady advised him to dress vulgarly, but Freya refused, noting that such outfits were unattractive to Max. The mother denied everything and sent her to find out from her husband whether this was really true. The heroine agreed, indicating that she would also voice this conversation. Matilda was taken aback and tried to stop the lady, but the girl ended the conversation and left Madame, heading towards Max. After leaving the room, Freya couldn't believe why she hadn't done it earlier. Mrs. Matilda was furious and could do nothing. Madame entered Max's office. The young man was not against her visit and put his business aside. Ms. Roussel admitted that she was concerned about the couple's relationship. Max didn't understand what was happening. Freya agreed to a divorce. His mother admitted to a conflict with her daughter-in-law, and perhaps his runaway father would return home tomorrow. Madame understood that this girl was unworthy of her son from the very beginning. Mr. Roussel turned a mountain of debt into a gold mine and even inherited the name of a hero of the revolution. It was not without reason that rumors circulated that the lady entered the Royal Academy just to see her handsome son. The lady claimed that Freya had not been quite right in her head since the wedding. The lady would either attack her husband in an inappropriate manner or suspect him of infidelity, and last year she disgraced the entire family. Even the ducal house would not object to the hospitalization of a mad wife, Matilda continued. Max didn't think that his mother would go that far, but he had no intention of agreeing or dancing to her tune. He said that he would deal with Freya's behavior himself. Mrs. Roussel left the office and realized that her plan to lock the bride in a madhouse had failed. The husband, putting his fingers to his temple, leaned back on the bench. He simply looked up, thinking about his further plans of action. Max opened the doors to the office and went to look for Freya. He walked along a huge corridor decorated with golden ornaments. While wandering, he saw a room with large carved doors ajar. This room was a library where the girl often stayed. Most have already forgotten, but people once called Freya Blanc white saffron. It was the most expensive and rare flower of the Blanc house. The girl sat on the sofa, leaning her back against a soft pillow and quietly turning over the pages with her fingers. Besides being an incredibly rare and beautiful flower, it was also the most capricious in care. Old memories of his meeting with Freya began to surface in Max's head. The little girl sat on an upholstered chair, holding a book in her hands. When the hero of the occasion, Freya Blanc, disappeared from her own birthday party, the fathers instantly turned the celebration into a competition to find the lady. The girl didn't like all this fuss and she decided to hide from sight. But no matter how hard the adults tried, the fair-haired boy found her first. "Everyone is looking for Freya," Max said, trying to get attention. He ignored the etiquette of small talk and expected the girl to send him away. But the little lady did not do this, and explained that her father and the servants knew where she was. Max recognized this book as a story about a brave prince saving a beautiful princess. He thought for a moment, wondering what to do in this situation. At that very moment he extended his hand, at which Freya looked up from her reading and looked at him. "What was the boy up to?" asked the lady. Max explained that if she wanted to be alone, then they needed to go. The little gentleman offered to take Freya to a place where no one could find her. The lady didn't understand how she would be left alone if she went with him, but Max stood his ground. She still didn't understand why she needed to go anywhere if they would find her sooner or later anyway. Getting down on one knee and holding out his hand, Max said, "Because he is the one who will save the princess." Freya was speechless and very embarrassed by the boy's unexpected behavior. She gently touched the hand extended to her, as if it were her savior from the local turmoil. The servants sent by Duke Blanc to search for the ladies found them in a chapel, far from the main castle. She, screaming and jumping with joy, announced in front of everyone her desire to marry Max. If he were a real prince, this meeting would have become a romantic memory, but in reality, Monsieur Roussel was just a puppet. Hurrying about her business with her hands full of treats, Mila saw Max watching Freya from behind the half-open door and asked if everything was okay. The master took the tray from the maid's hands and asked her to leave them. The red-haired girl was happy. She thought that the spouses had started getting along again. The mistress told the maid to put the tray on the bedside table. Afterwards, she noticed her husband entering and was surprised by his appearance. Freya stared at her husband and did not understand why he had come to her. She asked him what had brought him to such a place, causing him to look up from his paperwork. The man said that he heard about his wife's problems with her mother and came to sort things out. The heroine looked at the book again, wondering if this was the only reason he had come. Mr. Roussel couldn't understand what had happened to Freya, as if she had become a completely different person. Max asked what happened between his wife and Madame Matilda. When the mother spoke about the mistress's disturbed mental state, the husband became angry and therefore came to Lady Roussel. Freya said that her mother offered to use her dowry to open a salon, and she refused. Max remembered that his mother never complained about problems or difficulties in her relationship with her wife. Just as the couple agreed to divorce, the mother appears and reveals a very serious conflict that she had been hiding. The man started by saying that the girl had asked for a condition a divorce in 2 years and to keep that conversation a secret. Was she really planning to ruin the divorce? But Freya told her mother about the disagreement so that she could not cause a quarrel between the spouses. The girl indicated that if she was against it, then no pathetic tricks would help, and he would not be able to divorce her. These words seemed strange to the husband for a lady who had everything she wanted. Freya understood that it was difficult for her husband to believe her words because of the mistakes she had made. His wife assigned people to him and monitored his every move, checking all the women he dated. The heroine suggested drawing up a marriage contract in case of divorce. Freya placed the draft contract on the table with an offer to her husband to revise it. Until now, she had never dealt with contracts where she learned all this, Max thought. Even if Freya had drawn up an unfavorable contract, the guy could have made changes to it. The heroine said that if her husband believed her, she was ready to sign at least 100 of his contracts. She didn't want to live like this anymore because she knew how it would end. The gray-haired guy approached Max, handed him a paper, and asked if he had seen today's newspaper. His portrait with his wife was very expressively printed in the article. An obsession that transcended class boundaries, love or death, that was the slogan. Auguste asked if Madame Roussel had really proposed signing a marriage contract. He confirmed and added that he had put forward his own conditions. The husband himself would like to understand what his wife is planning and what is on her mind. The last thing she told him was her desire to learn how to run a business. The guy asked about a clause in the contract that caught his eye. Maybe divorce is a trap and marital duty is her true goal, Max thought deep in thought. Perhaps this is not unimportant, unless the husband can avoid this debt by any means. Mr. Roussel was now very eager to tackle this tempting task. However, the contract was very profitable. The men were particularly puzzled by the clause regarding the transfer of rights to develop the mine. Auguste Drafour, that was the name of the blonde young man who was in the office. We need to check whether Duc Blanc is behind this agreement. Perhaps he wanted to trample his own daughter into the dirt and deprive her of her rights so that she could not manage the family fortune. Max asked him to stop, to which Auguste called him soft towards his wife. The banker decided to find out whether there had been a leak of business information or whether perhaps one of the employees had coveted the lady's money. The husband asked to check whether there had been any recent contracts between Freya and the Duke. The essence of the agreement was that within 2 years, Max had to teach his wife how to manage the business as a business partner. The couple strolled around the square and chatted in their expensive, neat outfits. Freya asked her ex-husband to cooperate well for the next 2 years, to which the man in the elegant jacket objected that they were not yet divorced and extended his hand. Holding hands, the heroine said that she was simply rehearsing for the future. Mrs. Roussel, a little puzzled, let go of his hand. Looking down at the floor, these touches reminded her of pleasant times. The husband looked at his wife, who had turned away, and did not understand what had happened. Max asked Freya to go first as he needed to get back to his office. Mr. Roussel watched the girl as she turned peacefully and went about her business. The man didn't understand what strange feeling for Freya Blanc had overcome him. Perhaps it was regret. He turned his head, trying to distance himself from the thoughts that were driving him into a stupor. Each of the spouses went about their business, thinking about their experiences. Freya encouraged herself that everything would be fine and everything would work out, for the 12th time for sure. Mrs. Roussel met Mila in the square, and after a walk they decided to relax in the living room of the fashion house. The heroine wondered whether she should go to this farce. It was not only a place for shopping, but also an excellent venue for high society. It was worth checking what was going on there, so they went there together with the maid. When the lady appeared, the situation changed dramatically, and all participants in the discussion fell silent. There was an unshakable silence throughout the hall. No one dared to say anything. "Oh my God!" exclaimed the lady in a stylish burgundy-red dress adorned with rubies. The woman could not even imagine that such a noble person as Lady Freya would appear in such a place. The girl who was there earlier clarified whether this was the lady they were talking about in the newspapers. Obsessed with her husband's delusions and infidelity, she secretly followed him, came to every woman he met and threatened him. That same famous Lady Roussel, the hostess of the house, solemnly introduced the guest. Those present began to whisper among themselves, talking about the latest victim of Freya's threats. All these heroine psychos were due to jealousy towards her too-perfect husband. Lady Bouchard began to mock Freya, calling her obsessed and mad. The lady silently accepted all the ridicule from the guests of this house. But as soon as she said it, everyone suddenly became silent. Had anyone present spoken to the women who had suffered from the heroine's threats? Freya asked. Lady Roussel was reproached that everything was already written in the newspapers, to which she said that she offered a deal if the women disappeared from her husband's entourage. Freya would give them everything they wanted. The mistress of the house suggested that if the victims had not agreed to the conditions, they would have clearly died, but the girl denied this, saying that she had begged them not to seduce her husband. The pink-haired girl clarified that Lady Rossignol was almost kidnapped by mercenaries sent by Freya. But in reality, this woman did not give them a chance to meet, so Mrs. Roussel arranged the meeting by force, but did not cause any harm. The heroine did not deny that she insisted on marriage, followed women, but she can no longer remain silent when she is accused of something she did not do. Freya decided to speak about this publicly for the first time. The lady turned to Madame Salt Tristan, recalling the work of their house. Many false articles appeared in their newspapers. Moreover, she was the first to start publishing these provocative articles. Madame Salt Tristan tried to justify herself by saying that she had little understanding of the family business. The heroine decided to make concessions. She was not bothered by this. The victims kept threatening to sue Roussel, but no one dared. Everyone present was stunned and couldn't think of what to answer. Whatever Freya says, those who don't believe will still doubt, and that's their right. Madame Tristan was drowning in anger and humiliation, her hands folded on her dress. The heroine wished everyone a pleasant time and headed towards the exit. Approaching the door, Mila noticed that it was slightly open. She found this strange because the door was closed. The maid began to apologize for suggesting going to a fashion house. The awkward conversation was all her fault. The suspicious employee of the fashion house, who was there from the very beginning, suddenly disappeared. Mrs. Roussel wanted to change everything so that nothing would lead to a terrible tragedy. The image of an exhausted Max appeared before the heroine's eyes. The husband stood with his back directly at the end of the cliff. The man takes a small step towards the abyss. Freya, hysterical and in tears, rushes to her husband, trying to do at least something, but does not have time. "Look what your love has done to me," was the last thing Max said. The heroine fell to the floor and clutched the ground with her hands. She realized that her husband was right. She had gone crazy, choking with tears, she thought Freya. What happened could not have been love. It was addiction. The fair-haired young man in the cloak, who had been assigned to watch Madame Roussel, reported that the surveillance had failed. Auguste asked whether the girls had noticed the surveillance, to which they responded in the affirmative. He claimed that both Freya and Mila entered the fashion house, but only the maid came out. No one else left the establishment until closing time. The banker's son chuckled at this observation, because there is nothing easier than keeping an eye on two young ladies. Max set up surveillance at Auguste's request, but he didn't expect such an outcome. They would be better off hiring the people Mrs. Roussel worked with. They are clearly masters of their craft. At such moments, having left his family, Auguste envied the aristocrats, since they could take advantage of their family name. Max suggested returning to the family so that he would be guaranteed his place as heir. He agreed with this assumption and immediately changed the subject to the strange behavior of the gentleman's wife. Everyone already knew what she was doing in the living room of the fashion house, and she began to refute old newspaper articles. Mention the 19th century, snap at most of the marquises. It seemed to Auguste that Lady Roussel was a completely different person. Max doubted whether this was the woman he knew, or perhaps someone else. He was especially troubled by the words about an imposed marriage. As far as Mr. Roussel knew, Freya thought that this marriage saved her husband from the fate of a puppet. She certainly thought so, but the question remains how she stays several steps ahead of all his actions. The man sat there, perplexed, holding his hand to his mouth, thinking. A woman with purple hair in a strict, elegant suit entered the room and said hello. "Thank you for coming, Madame Fernel," said Freya, inviting her guest to sit down. Madame Inez Fernel lost her husband in one of the imperial wars and became the head of the family. For a noble woman to earn money was considered shameful, but fortunately Fernel had a business acumen. The businesslike approach of this strong woman became a role model among widows and divorced women. Freya reminded that she wanted to sell her dresses in Madame Inez's boutique, and the woman was very happy. But she wasn't sure that Lady Roussel needed this, since aristocrats considered the very act of having their clothes judged offensive. In fact, Madame Fernel politely refused. Freya expected such a reaction. If it had been Freya Blanc, it would have been a different matter, but by giving up her surname to marry a commoner, she was a laughingstock. Moreover, information spread that she was obsessed with her husband, and her name appeared in the newspapers. But the lady decided to briefly inform Madame Fernel of her plans. Freya had planned to inherit her family's title within 2 years, but it was a secret. The woman sitting opposite immediately understood why she had been invited. She is preparing for something for which she needs support. To agree or not, Madame thought, her palms covered in sticky sweat. If he agreed, he would become an ally who supported her at her most vulnerable moment, but it could also be her downfall. Freya asked about the new sewing business Fernel was planning. Only 2 seamstresses with whom Madame Inez had signed a contract knew about this, no one else. The heroine said that there is nothing secret, the walls have eyes and ears. The lady suggested not to pay attention to the little things. Fernel's trading instinct told her that she had to listen to Freya. "Okay, I'm all ears," Inez said happily, anticipating a big idea. Mrs. Roussel began by saying that she wanted to be very active in society, taking advantage of her rights as the only daughter of the Blanc family. She acknowledged that Madame Inez Fernel had excellent business sense, but there were areas where sense alone was not enough. Freya cited Versailles as an example, which further shocked the lady sitting opposite. Inez could not believe the words of this girl, who was slandered as abnormal. No matter how corrupted and tainted the lady may be, she still belongs to the Blanc family. Fernel didn't understand why they called her a stupid girl who thought about nothing but love. "At least no one in the Empire dislikes the color white," Freya said. Inez realized that this lady had been deceiving everyone around her all this time. Freya appeared before Fernel, a genius who knew how to hide her nature until the end. Madame asked when they would go to choose dresses for sale. There was a loud clatter of heels in the corridor, and Mrs. Matilda appeared in the doorway. "Freya," she called out to the heroine, "could have warned that guests had arrived," Matilda added. The girl explained that Madame Fernel had come on business. Mother said hello and announced that she would also like to talk. Matilda wondered if Freya was really getting rid of all those dresses. The girl was surprised, saying she didn't know that she had to ask permission even for such small things. The woman was confused and added that it was necessary to warn about guests in advance. Inez countered by explaining that she had been received very well and that there was no need to worry. Matilda noted that she would also like to place an order for new dresses that would soon be needed for the opening of her boutique, but Freya refused. Having received a rebuff, the mother decided not to argue and to agree with the heroine's choice. Lady Roussel suggested stopping by and seeing the Fernel boutique on the weekend, and when Inez agreed, she offered to select suitable items for the meeting in advance. Matilda could not hide her anger at the impossibility of bossing the girl around for her own benefit. After the seamstress left, Madame Roussel angrily turned to Freya with her dissatisfaction with her spouse's behavior. She stated that Max was spending too much time with the girl and that she had become completely arrogant, which forced the heroine to turn around and listen to her mother. The lady asked to clarify why Madame was responding in this way, but what followed were immediate complaints from Mrs. Roussel that she was doing a lot for the girl while her son did not even want to look at her, and as soon as her husband showed a little attention, she began to behave very provocatively. If we believe Matilda's words, then Max simply feels sorry for his wife, and she doesn't even understand this at the time. Freya realized that when one has many sins in one's soul, one can reveal one's true nature, which is exactly what Mother did. Lady Russell said that she had heard about the conversation between her mother and her husband, to which she was asked whether Max had told her. The heroine refuted this opinion, citing discussions of other people living in this house. Freya slowly approached the lady, bringing her face close to her ear. She knows that her mother wants to send her to the hospital, adding that even the most shameless person should understand that she cannot say such things in front of her only daughter, Blanc, and expect to go unpunished. Matilda thought that this would not reach the girl's ears, but someone else told her that they wanted to put Freya in a hospital. All the mother's plans sank into oblivion. She was completely defeated by the heroine's arguments and knowledge, and could not utter a word in her own defense. The lady warned that if you make the madman too angry, he will start biting. The lady could not contain her fear. She began to tremble all over her body, which made the caustic madam suddenly withdraw into herself. But Freya didn't want to make the situation worse, and said with a smile how lucky her mother was that the heroine wasn't crazy. Dr. Sigmund's office was a very cozy place, with an aesthetically pleasing interior in pastel colors, a small window with soft, flowing light green curtains that were gathered into very beautiful folds, and a ficus tree in a white pot on the left side of the floor. The table, strewn with a pile of documents and various papers with folders, apparently belonged to a very busy doctor. The tired man asked his visitor again if he had understood correctly that she was living through the same period of time over and over again. The visitor turned out to be Freya, dressed in an all-black, highly intricate and detailed Victorian mourning outfit with Gothic elements, complete with a large, dramatic black headdress and wide brim, and she confirmed the doctor's question. The doctor wondered what made the patient think that way, but it didn't matter to her, to which the man asked what was important then. What was important was what the girl was going to ask. She said in which city the doctor had been before. It was the city of Durland. Sigmund fell into a stupor, but the heroine did not stop there. Last year, the doctor moved to Granson and opened a clinic here, and fled from Durland because society categorically refused to use hypnosis in psychiatry, and that is why he is here. The psychiatrist realized that someone had inquired about him. The floor flowed over his thoughtful grimace. Freya, smiling sweetly, sat relaxed and only wanted to show that fulfilling her request was beneficial, both for her and for the doctor. The doctor stated that he was ready to listen to the girl, but if the proposal included illegal actions, then he would refuse this matter without hesitation, to which the lady warned about the complete legality of this agreement. Roussel slowly folded her hands over her Gothic robes and tried to collect her thoughts to continue the conversation. Having made up her mind, she said that she wanted to erase her memories with the help of hypnosis. Sigmund was only 15 minutes late due to registration, and the lady arrived just as he was closing, although he should have been wary because of her mourning attire. The memories that Freya wanted to erase, were they connected to that same repeating time? The doctor asked. The heroine confirmed the doctor's suspicions and asked only to erase the memory of one person from her head. The psychiatrist was surprised at how simply the girl spoke about incredibly complex problems. Sigmund asked why she wanted to erase these memories. The lady replied, because she lives the past over and over again, and each time she sees the death of this man. But the man Freya was talking about turned out to be alive, which completely confused the doctor. The lady didn't care whether they believed her or not. She just needed help in erasing all the memories. The doctor became interested in this unusual task of erasing the repeated death of a living person from the memory. The heroine said that if it seems crazy, then it is, so there is no need to dwell on whether it is true or not, but Sigmund is obliged to fulfill the request. The doctor was unsure whether, if it was a matter of treatment, it was important to know whether the lady was telling the truth, to which Freya objected, saying that she had come not as a patient, but with a request, the fulfillment of which would be of benefit to him. Roussel lightly and demonstratively placed the painted envelope on the doctor's desk. Moreover, the lady knew that Sigmund was pretending to be indifferent, although in fact he was interested in this situation, and in the end she understood that the psychiatrist would accept her proposal. It was definitely an offer he couldn't refuse, as he wanted to kill two birds with one stone, earn money, and conduct a hypnosis session. Sweat ran down the doctor's face, doubts tormented his mind, but the offer was too profitable. A man's hand tensely covered the vintage-style yellowish envelope with a clap. Freya invited Sigmund to 11th Street after morning service on Sunday, and if he doesn't come, the heroine will report the check missing. The man in a formal suit and a robe over his clothes understood his hopeless situation. Roussel stated that she knows absolutely everything about the doctor and is not afraid to apply her knowledge when necessary. Finally, the doctor asked to answer one question whose death was repeated in the girl's memories. Perhaps it was her husband. Freya didn't know what to answer to the question that took her by surprise. She continued to sit silently, fiddling with her fingers, with her head bowed, trying to look away somewhere far away. The lady confided in the doctor about her situation when she turned 23 in the winter. Her husband died before her eyes, and she considered herself to be to blame for his death. She wanted to follow him too, but woke up in the spring when she was only 22 years old. Roussel felt complete despair and a lack of understanding of what was happening. It seemed to her that all of this was a hallucination, and she was going crazy. At the moment, she is trapped between the spring of 22 and the summer of 23, desperately trying to save her husband. And the doctor is the only thread that can pull the girl out of this hell, Freya said. Sigmund asked if the lady was afraid that the doctor would reveal this story in public, since it's not so easy to trust everyone you meet. Roussel was not concerned about this, saying that the psychiatrist had taken the Hippocratic Oath and would not be able to break it without a good reason. The man was very stunned that the girl knew so much about him, to which Freya repeated that she was tired of living the same time over and over again, and that she urgently needed help. An aristocratic carriage moved slowly from the city towards the Roussel estate, and the heroine was in it. She looked thoughtfully at the view passing by from the window and reflected on the past, in which she never wondered why her father allowed Max to ignore unfavorable articles. She should have at least wondered about it at the time. How a 19th-century newspaper received information about women who suffered at the hands of Freya. And why didn't Duke Blanc protect the only heir to the title? Why didn't the girl feel dissatisfied with such a father? But now she knew what she had to do. Lady Roussel told Mila that this summer she might have to spend time at the Chateau Blanc. The maid was clearly displeased and did not object. The heroine understood her reaction. She did not have pleasant memories of that place. The maid added that she liked the current mistress, who was able to stand up for herself and thought only of herself. Freya was clearly surprised by such a compliment. Maybe she likes being like this herself. She has clearly become more responsible and thoughtful lately. Mila asked not to pay attention to other people's words and to act only as Lady Roussel wanted. No matter how many lives the heroine lived, no matter in what guise she appeared, this sweetest girl never abandoned or betrayed her mistress. The maid simply wanted Freya to never suffer again, to which she received approval and a sweet smile in response. Stepping towards the exit, Roussel thought that she couldn't relax, and she also remembered the dialogue between her husband and mother. She replayed the conversation in her head. Her mother did not want to interfere in the couple's relationship, but despite this, she insisted on psychiatric treatment for the girl. Such memories threw the heroine out of reality. For a moment. She looked off into the distance with empty, sad eyes. But she was distracted by a servant who came and asked her to show herself to her husband. They were supposed to have a conversation. Freya came into the hall where her husband and his mother were already standing on the second-floor balcony. Noticing the girl, Matilda turned around abruptly, asking her son to put off the conversation, and left them. Madame had been behaving quietly for a couple of days, and now she couldn't stand it anymore, Freya noted, asking the maid to leave. Having entered the room and closed the door, the spouses began a dialogue in a calm atmosphere. Max asked to ignore his mother's antics because it wasn't worth it. Freya understood and asked why he came. Maybe something important had happened. The guy didn't understand whether she didn't know about the surveillance or was just pretending, and said that he wanted to visit his wife. They say that when she was in the fashion house, she refuted articles written in the Tristan House newspaper. Freya liked this trait of her husband's character. Before everything between them completely deteriorated, he sometimes expressed his true feelings. Although she didn't expect him to admit to surveillance so easily, the lady said that, to be precise, not everything in the newspaper was true. It is absolutely true that she suspected her husband of infidelity, organized surveillance, and made inquiries about women. But blackmail and attempts to kidnap Lady Rossignol are lies, and whether to believe it or not is up to Max. The man asked why she kept silent about it, to which Freya replied that he was too angry. She was afraid that her husband would not believe her. "That's all he wanted to hear," the heroine asked. The guy just remained silent. He didn't know how or what to answer. Lowering his head and looking away, he said that he also had something to say. The lady tried to find out what he was keeping quiet about and added that he wanted to go to work on Monday. Max didn't understand why so soon, since there were only 2 days left until Monday. "Is there a reason for such a hurry?" the husband asked in surprise, puzzled by his wife's spontaneous decision. The girl said that he had serious doubts about her abilities, but there was nothing she could do. She had to hurry. Freya was offended that all the women written about in the newspapers had been to his office, but she had not. The wife chuckled, saying that her husband was afraid that she would make a crazy scene there, and promised that this would not happen. And she said that nothing like last year's incident would happen again. The guy had doubts, but he didn't want to break the contract, so he had to agree. Madame Matilda stood in her room, decorated with various ornamental vases, together with the butler. She angrily speculated about who could have told Freya about the conversation with her husband, who could have set her up. Turning to the man, she shouted why he hadn't found the rat, and he replied that it was difficult to identify a servant who was secretly talking with a lady. "Then we need to fire all our subordinates and find new ones," Matilda shouted. The lady threw her painted fan on the floor, after which a plastic clang was heard throughout the room. She was furious. Her plan to send Freya to a hospital and pocket the dowry had failed. She hadn't strengthened her place in high society, and she hadn't even been able to expand her salon. What an impudent girl, thought Matilda, but still she was powerless in front of Max. True, since this is how it turned out, it is better to remind the daughter-in-law what her place is in this house. thought the lady. She wanted to scale things down dramatically because it would be easier to set an example for the girl. The people in the office were discussing Lady Russell's renewed headlines and were looking closely at the paper. The newspaper reported on how Freya expressed her indignation regarding the famous painting by Théoret Dupré. The seated guys began to doubt the veracity of this news, because as an educated aristocrat, she could not have known such a famous artist. Everyone felt a chill run through them from head to toe. They recognized that voice and were in complete shock at what was happening. They couldn't believe that Lady Roussel herself stood before them, in a neat green and white dress. Freya thanked everyone present for recognizing her at first sight and asked where her husband was now. Everyone suddenly became nervous and, lifting their butts off their chairs, began to say that they were very happy to meet and that Max was in his office further down the corridor. The heroine was amused that an ordinary walk on Saturday became the subject of a cartoon in the newspaper. She thought that these were just more provocative pranks, so she didn't attach much importance to it and moved towards her husband. After the incident at the fashion house, when the lady went with Mila to the salon's showroom, she no longer paid attention to the fact that they were being watched. So the caricature doesn't bother her at all, but if it's a reaction to a conversation with Madame Tristan, then it's already funny. So they know everything, but pretend they don't, the heroine thought. Most likely Madame Tristan complained to her husband. In turn, he could not resist and decided to make such stupid articles, which is strange for the great house of the empire. They could have published an article in their newspaper about Lady Roussel's shameful behavior in the fashion house, but everything was hushed up, she thought. The guys looked at her in silence. They couldn't understand how the master's evil wife could be so beautiful. She left an unforgettable impression on everyone present with her grace. "Lady Roussel, long time no see," Auguste greeted the guest as he approached the worker's office. Freya greeted him sweetly in response, slowly walking towards the gray-haired guy. The banker's son, in turn, tried to hide his disgust for this lady, but continued the conversation, offering to take her to her husband. Auguste knocked on the huge light green door leading to the master's office. In the office, the husband was sitting at a massive table with a marble top. The banker reported that he had brought the lady. Max Russell looked up from the important papers and looked at those present with bewilderment. Her husband asked if Freya really wanted to learn business. She agreed and asked what had him so confused. Drafort noted that it would be uncomfortable to work in such an outfit. Next time he should wear something simpler. The girl was embarrassed. She wanted to impress her husband, but she overdid it. Max had a thoughtful face. He did not understand what his wife wanted and was constantly on guard. Last time she appeared in black, as if she was burying someone, but only darkness emanated from her. And now she dressed up as if she was going on a date, although she knew perfectly well where and why she was going. And if the first misfortune that led to Mask's death was a meeting with the heroine herself, the second was the inheritance of the father's business, who ran away from home, and the last was the red thread on the map. Freya clutched her dress with her hands and understood perfectly well what was being discussed, but she didn't want to get ahead of herself. She asked what was marked on the map, which was followed by a counter-question about what these marks looked like. The heroine thought for a moment and replied that it was like a road from one place to another. Auguste replied that this was indeed the case, and he realized that the girl was not just asking for nothing, she had something in mind. Max continued, "A railway will be built along this red thread, the name of which is Lutèce Saint-Germain-en-Laye. The failure of this project will deprive the gentleman of his position in the business world and his reputation as the hero's grandson. The surest way to avoid this misfortune is to force Max to give up the matter himself. This is the most difficult path. The girl's strength alone is not enough to make her husband back off." The heroine quietly asked again if it would really be a railway. Mr. Roussel confirmed and said that he plans to build the first passenger road. The lady understood how much he had invested in this project and what he had expected. But was he really doing this only because of his father? She asked. Max hung his head and didn't want to answer. In fact, he didn't know what to answer in such a situation. The husband's father, Benoit Roussel, was a swindler. Unlike his grandfather, a hero of the revolution, he was treacherous and vile. He abandoned his wife and son. Due to a scandal before his wedding with Freya, the Roussel family was left hanging by a thread, and Max found himself on the verge of prison in place of his father. All the accusations fell on him, and it was also believed that he was in collusion with his father, which completely disgraced his family. And at this desperate moment, Freya Blanc officially proposed to Max Roussel, or rather, proposed marriage. But at that moment, the heroine did not know that Duke Blanc had made exactly the same proposal. She didn't understand the 20-year-old boy's misfortune. Perhaps she didn't even try to understand. She just firmly believed in a happy ending. But this time the lady had to fix everything, every little thing that could interfere with her wonderful life. Suddenly the heavy doors swung open and the silhouette Freya remembered appeared in the doorway. A tall, dark-haired, handsome man came in. He came to discuss a matter with the gentleman, but he got confused mid-sentence. Noticing Lady Russell in the office, he fell silent. Only Max sat calmly, waiting for the conversation to continue. At last he has come, the girl thought. This stately man was the Marquis Tristan, the owner of that very newspaper. He was stunned by such an unexpected meeting on his white tie. There was a large, interesting, and very complex pin with a purple stone in the middle. This long-awaited moment had arrived. The heroine understood why he was here, and was happy with this development of events. Max Roussel and Erler Tristan were undoubtedly the most handsome men in the Empire, but to Freya he was someone she wanted to shoot, nothing more and nothing less. The Marquis greeted Lady Tristan nervously. He was clearly not delighted with such company. He was overcome with shame. His wife's story and today's cartoon from a 19th-century newspaper were spinning in his head. Lady Roussel pretended to be embarrassed by such company and asked her husband to warn her about such meetings with his partners in advance. Max felt that the atmosphere in the office had changed, but he didn't understand why he needed to warn about his partners. Freya tried to awkwardly evade the answer and thought about what she could say, while Erler stood in the passage and did not dare to enter. The heroine was embarrassed that their first meeting after the marriage proposal with House Tristan was taking place in such a place. The gentleman did not understand what kind of marriage proposal they were talking about, or whether his wife had already had a fiancé since she was 8 years old. The girl said that her father had told her that it was better not to mention such things, and she apologized to the Marquis for putting him in an awkward position. Tristan didn't dwell on it and asked not to worry about what happened in the past. Freya agreed. Auguste came to his senses and suddenly turned to Max. After all, there was a scandal with his family just at that time. There was another moment of silence in the gentleman's office. Dreyfort wanted to do something to avoid escalating the situation. The banker suddenly called out to the lady and offered to inspect the entire company. He wanted to give her a tour. Dreyfort and Roussel left the office for the viewing so as not to disturb the gentleman and his partner. Max clarified whether the proposal had actually been made, to which he received confirmation such was the will of Erler's father. Mr. Roussel understood that the matter was quite old, and perhaps the refusal of the offer had finally ruined the relationship between the two houses. Besides, the divorce agreement had already been filed, and the old proposal was not a cause for concern. Mr. Tristan wanted to get to the point of the conversation, distracting his partner from his thoughts. He noted that a bill on amendments to the law on railways will be introduced at the next Senate meeting. These amendments, as luck would have it, were directed against their plan. Something had to be adopted, and workarounds had to be found. Auguste asked what the heroine was thinking about so hard. She turned around and did not understand what they wanted from her. Freya asked to clarify what exactly the guy wanted to hear from her. Dreyfort asked to clarify the situation. Why did she deliberately raise the topic of Marquis Tristan? Does the girl really want to ruin the partnership? The lady asked if this was really the case, then wouldn't the banker rush to throw her out of the office immediately? Turning his head away, he understood that it was beyond his power. The marriage contract was in effect. The document itself forbade Max to exclude his wife from the case. No matter what her motives were, she would remain a business partner. Freya warned that Auguste had misunderstood everything from the very beginning, and was confused. The reason her husband had allied with House Trista was obvious. It was to mend fences. It is not surprising that Erler's father, a moderate royalist, was able to offend Blanc's only daughter, a convinced monarchist. But that was only half the truth. If he wanted to avoid Freya's father, he should have involved House Dreyfort. The guy got angry and asked her not to speak so irresponsibly if she didn't know anything. She made him wonder what submitting a betrothal petition to the Blanc household meant for Dreyfort, turned around and headed for her husband's office. She was interested in what Marquis Tristan was going to talk about. Auguste was depressed. He felt that the girl simply smeared him across the wall. As she left, Freya stated that she was not there for entertainment and that she was not interested in gossip at the moment. She began to doubt that her words about a business conversation were less important to the banker than stories about the house that had petitioned her father for an engagement. Drafort was taken aback, so he hated the aristocrats, but he could not do anything. There were no privileges. They returned to the office. Erler and Max immediately noticed this and stopped talking. Freya asked not to be distracted. She would just sit in the background without creating unnecessary noise. Mr. Roussel asked the Marquis to continue, but he could not collect his thoughts. When Tristan came to his senses, he said that the road workers turned out to be much more dangerous than expected. The first point was about limiting the tariff on freight transportation to 1.5 cents, the second about the tariff on passenger transportation to 50 cents. The men had to block the 1.5 cents on freight transport at all costs. But Freya understood that they were very wrong, because living the same time over and over again, she remembered how it would all end. She knew one thing for sure: no one present had the power to prevent the bill from being passed. Tristan suggested meeting with those who might vote against the project. Max was grateful for this act and said that he would try to find ways to help too. The Marquis said goodbye to the people present and headed towards the exit. Tristan, standing in the doorway, bowed peacefully in farewell to Lady Roussel. She was interested in where the Marquis was heading. It seemed he was going to go around the nobility in order to win them over to his side. Perhaps he would go and report that the Duke's daughter was up to something dangerous. Freya understood that since Erler saw her in this office, in a couple of days she would definitely receive a letter from him. The lady wanted to voice her thoughts, but Auguste interrupted her with a question whether the collection of votes could be completely entrusted to the Marquis. Max replied that if he tried to interfere, it would cause a general protest, which would doom the plan to failure. He always walked a fine line between being the grandson of a hero and the son of a con man, so he always had to be careful in his actions. Is it really possible to rely on just one person in such a delicate matter, let alone Tristan? We can entrust this to the Draforts, Freya suggested. The banker replied that his relationship with his father was worse than with his enemy, and he had severed all ties with the house. Then Lady Russell suggested trying to negotiate with the runaway son's house herself. The gentleman wanted to know what Freya was going to do there and why she was going there. She simply wanted to meet with House Drafort as a business partner and win them over to her side. The girl said that since the men didn't even want to try, she would go herself and they wouldn't lose anything from that. Freya asked not to worry, since she was taking on the matter. It would look like the whim of a mad duchess. The banker agreed that this was an accurate, albeit outrageous, remark. Perhaps she had taken some kind of drug to clear her mind. The lady believed that the Drafort's house would be ideal for this, and she had already chosen a meeting place. The ideal place was the jockey club. No one understood where such guesses could come from in the lady's mind. The men, shocked, asked how she could have known about this. Auguste felt uneasy. Was it possible that this woman was checking not only Max's circle, but also everyone who worked with him? But women are not allowed in there, or rather, ordinary women, but the girl decided to appear as a troublemaker. The banker noticed that the lady was not even trying to hide her feeling of superiority. Freya invited her husband too, if that would make him feel better, but Max asked her why she wanted to study business and why he was deciding to do everything his own way. The lady believed that what happened was an important lesson for her. The guys couldn't figure out this person's train of thought, no matter how hard they tried, and stood there with very funny grimaces on their faces. The girl continued saying that her husband would hardly want to leave work with her, so she would leave first. Or maybe she's wrong, Freya finished, standing and waiting for her husband's answer. Max agreed with her, wanting to stay in the office and continue working. She understood everything perfectly and knew that this would happen. With sadness in her eyes, the girl left the room. The men were stunned. The lady's departure was a breath of fresh air for them. They doubted that this was really the Freya Blanc they knew. She left first because Max wants it. She couldn't be that crazy mistress. Mr. Roussel asked if there were any contracts between his wife and the Duke. Auguste replied that to his knowledge there was nothing. He added that she had told him something alarming, and Max asked what exactly. She told him to think about what it meant to submit an engagement petition to the Blank House for Draforg, and it dawned on the banker. This woman said for sure that if the Marquis wanted to avoid her father, Max did not yet understand what was going on. Auguste began to panic. He began to question the gentleman whether he had spoken to his wife about the affair with the Duke of Blanc. The guy was torn between doubts. No, the gentleman couldn't say. He certainly wouldn't have mentioned such a thing. But then how did Madame Roussel know everything? Only Dreyford or Max's father, Benoit Roussel, know what happened between Max and the Duke. If Freya had learned of the affair between her husband and the Duke, she would almost certainly have quarreled with her father to the point of mortal enmity. Mr. Roussel asked to postpone this question for a while and to find out about the marriage petition. If anything comes to light, that in itself will be a problem for the guys. They need to be careful, the banker said. Max couldn't answer. He was furiously immersed in his thoughts, trying to understand the current situation. Tristan is already deeply involved in the matter. If it turns out that he has some connection with the Duke, it will be a lot of problems. Roussel believed that it was better to be as informed as possible about what was happening than to be caught off guard. Max was sure that he knew Freya well, even better than she knew herself, but lately he couldn't understand her. Looking at her, he asks himself the same question over and over again: is this really the woman he knows? He kept trying to understand what had happened to her in such a short period of time. What is the heroine thinking about? What are her motives? What is she trying to achieve? Freya received a letter in which there was a desire to meet and talk face to face. Only half a year had passed since their last meeting, and his entire message to his daughter was just one single line. The girl wrote in her reply that she would visit the Duke at the Jockey Club. The heroine asked the butler to deliver the letter to the messenger waiting at the estate gates. Lorenzo, taking the letter, decided to take a desperate step. Madame intends to invite Freya to her beauty salon. The lady was surprised by such information. The butler hired by Madame Matilda conveyed the news to the girl about the invitation to the opening of the salon. Although he was not asked, he decided to tell about Lady Roussel's invitation himself. The heroine asked whether Lorenzo was aware of whose hands held the true power in this house. The butler believed that the real mistress of this house was originally Lady Roussel, so Lorenzo wants to get mercy, since he agrees to recognize her as his mistress. Madame ordered the entire staff to be replaced because Freya's informant was not found, and the butler decided to help the girl since he would soon be leaving them. The heroine said that she could give him a letter of recommendation from the Blanc house and an appropriate reward for his services. Then Freya began with the first request, to bring the entire list of invited guests to the salon. Lorenzo knew it sounded like a trifle, but how the lady used this list might reveal who the rat was. But he did not refuse. Since he was destined to be expelled, he could at least receive a recommendation. The butler was very surprised by such cunning and resourcefulness of his mistress. It made him happy. If she had been like this from the very beginning, he would have taken her side unconditionally. Freya was taken aback by such pleasant words. She hadn't heard compliments addressed to her for a long time. She became embarrassed and couldn't think of what to answer the man. Her cheeks turned red. The girl was very touched by Lorenzo's behavior. It was the first time something like this had happened to her. Now she has to think about her father and Monsieur de Laporte, and also not forget about her mother's salon. And then there was the imperial ball, and she was tormented by doubts about all these problems that had piled up. For the first time since last year's scandal, she began to appear in public, and she certainly cannot avoid ridicule. If that's the case, then she will become the most noticeable Pierrette at the ball, the girl decided without a doubt. Freya arrived at Madame Fernel's house and thanked her for the urgent meeting in such matters. The sooner the better, Inez noted. The girls entered the round, dark doors leading into the hall of the wealthy mistress of the house. Fernel introduced the heroine to her business partner, Paul Charlot, a tall, red-haired guy. Paul reluctantly greeted Freya, for which he immediately received a scolding from the hostess. The girl greeted him in return and extended her hand for a handshake. The guy asked if it was true that the lady could buy them a ticket to the palace. He was very straightforward, which surprised Freya. Inez explained that Paul was a tailor's apprentice and that he had amazing talent, but when it came to matters of aristocracy, he was worse than a baby. But Charlotte himself stated that there would soon be a line of rich girls lining up for his outfits. In just 1 year, all the noble ladies of the empire would be wearing dresses created by this man. Freya asked what Inez's next plan would be if she opened the way to the palace for them. Fernel began by saying that they wanted to sign a contract with the imperial court and introduce the concept of a fashion master. Tailors for the nobility were required to take the client's opinion into account, and craftsmanship was assessed by how accurately the client's vision was realized. A high fashion designer is someone who is trusted with the right to choose the outfit itself, and the client only chooses from already created designs. In fact, Freya came with 2 new proposals. These are just options. If they refuse, the relationship will not change in any way. Inez immediately became interested and wanted to listen, but the guy stood rooted to the spot. The first proposal was to let Charlotte sew her first dress specifically for the heroine, which she would wear to the palace ball. Fernel happily agreed and offered to look at several samples that were in progress, but Paul objected. He believed that his first dress should be made properly. He would select everything anew, from the choice of fabric to the stitching. Madame was already eagerly preparing to hear the second proposal, as the first idea was very advantageous. Freya suggested that they think about signing a contract with her before concluding an agreement with the court, which greatly confused the seamstresses. The guy was taken aback. He didn't understand whether this was an aristocratic joke or whether he should just spit and turn around. Dressing the highest-ranking woman in the empire in your design is a great success, wealth and glory, but behind the beautiful picture there is always a trap, the heroine said. Paul was the most talented tailor Freya knew, but he was also the most unhappy. In each of the repeating cycles of time, Charlotte's dresses conquered the empire time and again. But no one knew the name Paul Charlot, and the boutique under his name never opened. Instead of his name, the exquisite taste of the Empress, the most precious pearl of the empire, became famous. The guy couldn't bear it, and soon his name appeared in the obituary of some publisher's newspaper. Inez, too, soon after Paul left for the palace, suddenly wrapped up her affairs and disappeared. Too much talent can sometimes be like a curse, especially for those who are unable to protect it. Freya tried to figure out how to convince them otherwise and turn the situation in her favor. Charlotte could not stand it and began to shout that if the girl thought he was a commoner and did not understand anything, he would force the Empress to wear his dress. For a guy full of pride and self-confidence, stealing his own design is like death. The heroine understood this and said that if he agrees to the contract, he will meet the Empress. Paul doubted. He did not understand why he should choose an abnormal young lady and not the pearl of the empire. The girl said that he could not accept these proposals because further cooperation did not depend on them. He wanted to refuse immediately, but Inez interrupted him. She wanted to know what the benefit of the offer was. If they sign a contract with Freya, she will wear only Charlotte dresses and open a boutique under their name. Fernel said that this was not enough. Since the palace would offer the same thing, Madame Roussel offered to open the doors to the palace for them, but could not interfere with other contracts. The realm they are about to enter is where the greediest family in the empire lives. They want a lot and have the means to achieve their goals. If they just want the highest-ranking woman to wear a Paul Charlotte dress, they may not accept the offer. But what if a guy wants to become the first master of haute couture and open a boutique in the empire under his own name? Freya insisted that they simply wouldn't have a better choice. She was trying to gain their trust. Paul said that he had never heard such vile blackmail. She sang such sweet stories. Inez asked Lady Roussel to give her time to think before making a final decision. The girl was pressed against the wall, but she believed that she had done everything right. All that was left was to hope for the best. She gave time until the dress was finished being made. Freya's behavior at the ball would depend on their choice. Why did the lady think she could please the Empress? She hadn't even seen a single dress, asked Charlot. But in fact, she had already seen everything, and even tried it on, but she didn't know that it was his work. As they boarded the carriage, Freya warned them to be careful, as the walls had eyes and ears. And she added that no matter what decision they made, her dress had to be the most beautiful at the imperial ball. There is no need to talk about this again, the seamstresses agreed. Madame Roussel said that I would eat them alive in the palace if she wanted to scare them. Then it worked out well. Inez felt she had become too careless. She was thinking about how to carry out their business, but she forgot about the risks. All her thoughts were only about the new idea, and she lost sight of the fact that someone would want to appropriate it. More precisely, about the fact that all the abilities would be squeezed out of Paul, and she immediately realized that this was what Freya was trying to convey. In other words, for the sake of the dress for the Empress, you will have to give up everything else. At this time, the heroine returned to the estate and went to her room, paying attention to the letter. She reached for the letter, but there was another envelope that caught her interest. The letter was from my father with a response to the meeting, the second, a list of guests. This was good news, which inspired the heroine, and she began to read the names of the guests. And then one name caught her eye, which gave birth to a new idea. Clutching the paper tighter and tighter, Freya began to frantically think over her next course of action. She called Mila, who at that moment magically appeared in the room. The lady needed to visit the bank to put her new plan into action. A man who entered a bookstore called out to a man reading a newspaper and asked him to find a book. The worker, without looking up from his reading, asked what particular work the visitor was looking for. Black cat, the guest said, a password the man hadn't heard for a long time. He looked up and said he hadn't expected to hear the code again and see Mrs. Roussel. She stood at the entrance in light clothes, and in her hands she held a neat leather handbag. The shop owner asked me to follow him, putting aside my newspaper reading. Freya followed the man down the dilapidated stairs into the basement. Lei asked to find some information that the heroine wants to know. She put the envelopes on the table. It seemed Freya had not yet broken her old habits, he noted. The heroine ordered to find out everything about the person whose name is on the paper. This will take at least 10 days, Joseph said. The girl turned to the man she hired to follow Max. At first, she thought that he had sold the information to the newspapers, but she was wrong. Joseph, the owner of a shop that was about to go bankrupt, was the head of a network of informants. The man never sold information about the lady. He only passed it on as ordered, and that was what she was counting on. It was a trap for the Blanc household that he would fall for. They tied her hands using the information she herself gave them, but now it's their turn. The Lutece Club served as a place of relaxation and entertainment for men. A man who doesn't go to a club was spoken of as if it wasn't worth saying a word to him, and those who became its members were filled with a feeling of being chosen and proud. Distinguished visitors argued about gambling in the foyer. At this moment, one of the men noticed something was wrong. Everyone immediately realized what had happened. This club, considered the best in all of Lutece, had many people lining up just to become a member. Almost everyone was willing to pay tens of thousands of pounds for this. The distinct sound of high heels could be heard on the stone floor. No one could understand what kind of idiot would dare to bring a lady to a sacred place. Freya was resplendent in her luxurious vintage outfit. The collar and bodice were trimmed with lace, and on her head she wore a white hat decorated with flowers. The guests were perplexed by what had happened, and they also noticed Max, Duke Blanc's son-in-law. Mr. Roussel himself was dressed in a white shirt and tie, over which he wore a light-colored suit. Did Roussel really decide to make a laughingstock of himself? Everyone knew about his falling out with Blanc's daughter. Freya held on with all her might, not showing it. The fact that Roussel, even being a member of the club, brought a woman here, isn't that a reason for betrayal? Besides, people didn't recognize the heroine at first. It was that same crazy Lady Roussel. Did he really bring this particular girl here on purpose? At this point, it looks as if he came here only to insult the Duke. At that very moment, Duke Blanc appeared. If he saw his son-in-law publicly cheating, he would fall into a rage. But the man in the white jacket with a gold brooch was unperturbed and happily walked towards the couple. He greeted with satisfaction his only daughter and husband who came to visit him. The observers were shocked. They expected anything but such a turn of events. Could this woman really be Freya Roussel, the daughter of Duke Blanc? The guests wondered. The visitors in the building's lobby kept exchanging glances. The girl asked her husband to smile because everyone was looking at them. Max agreed, but at the same time he strongly doubted the correctness of his wife's actions. Two men were particularly interested and stared openly. Freya stood there for a moment, waiting for her father to take action. The visitors continued to get on her nerves. Everyone avoided this trio, preferring not to stick their heads out and silently observe the surroundings. Mr. Roussel did not like visiting such places. The crowd irritated him. The Duke greeted the couple warmly and said he was very glad to see them. Freya lovingly leaned against her father, resting her head on his strong and dear shoulder. Afterwards, the man greeted Max, smiling and extending his hand for a handshake. "Your Grace, it's been a long time since we've seen each other," said Mr. Roussel, bowing his head. The guy considered the Duke an impudent hypocrite who used his charisma to gain recognition in public. Even though the jockey club was located in an area controlled by the Gold faction, no one expressed any dissatisfaction at that moment. At this point, he held the most powerful authority in the empire, other than the imperial family. And Max was destined to be trampled by this power and abandoned to the mercy of fate. Not knowing his place, he extended his hand to the Duke's daughter. Mr. Roussel knew that Freya was out of his reach, but everything turned out exactly the opposite. The Duke understood that the smart boy did not take after his father, and soon Max became the fiancé of Blanc's daughter. Benoit realized that this was a chance sent from heaven, and he should hold on to it with all his might. So Max Roussel, having received the nickname Groom, became a toy in the hands of the mistress. The conversation took place in the cozy living room of the club. The girl talked about going to the gallery and even buying one of the paintings. Freya also said that she even started coming to Max's work. Mr. Roussel did not utter a word the whole time. He listened attentively. It is strange that when all the newspapers were full of articles about Frey, the Duke did not take any action. Even when the persecution of the heroine began, Blanc remained silent. Not even a letter of greeting came from his house. And for some unknown reason, she also did not contact him first, as if they had disappeared for each other. And now the two were talking as if the breakup had never happened. They communicated like rivals, studying each other for weaknesses. Max thought that this meeting would clear something up for him, but now he is even more confused. Freya stated that she wanted to attend the Imperial Ball this year. Since the House of Roussel does not receive Imperial invitations, it is impossible for a commoner to attend the ball. For these two it didn't matter. Freya Roussel could return to the Blanc house at any moment. The daughter wanted to appear at the Imperial Ball. It was a desire to go out into society. Father suggested attending the ball next time. Freya objected. She wanted to show up this year. The unspoken law of the world dictates that one should not remember a girl's life until her first appearance in society. If a woman who married without a debut after a divorce or widowhood entered high society, she was considered unmarried, especially if the first wedding night never took place. After Max's death, when she was bombarded with marriage proposals, she understood her father's plan. Blanc did not recognize them as spouses, and for other families, Freya remained a pure virgin. The girl wanted everyone to know about their marriage vow. Freya's pressure dealt a severe blow to Duke Blanc's plans. Since his daughter insists, he cannot refuse. There were cigars on the table. They were in a decorative box, complete with a cutter. Blanc offered Mr. Roussel a cigarette, but he refused. The Duke noticed that they were getting along well with Freya, and that the guy had forgotten the agreement between them. Max held his ground and didn't show it. He was irritated by the very existence of the man opposite him. Monsieur Roussel hated that damned contract. He knew that Duke Blanc was as much of a bastard as his father. What kind of monster, calling himself a father, would negotiate the marriage of his only daughter? However, the gentleman who agreed to this deal was no less of a scoundrel. Maintain the marriage until she herself gets tired, and not spend the first wedding night. These were the conditions. He received this contract during the escape of his father, who left behind a steel mill on the brink of collapse and a canal project tainted by fraud. If Max had known about the Duke's plans then, he himself would have opened the prison door and gone inside. Blanc asked why Freya went to work to see her husband. Roussel replied that he never showed up at home, which is why she ran after him. The father was interested in how, after all the guy's actions, the girl still chased after him, even showing up to work. Could there really have been something between them that only Max didn't know about? Perhaps that strange feeling of mutual exploration that he felt a little earlier arose because their meeting was in fact the first. Be that as it may, Duke Blanc wanted the girl to return without a single stain. The boy understood that the man still considered him a pathetic doll, led by his mother. The Duke turned around confidently and went about his business. He was sure of himself. Or maybe he understood that Max was up to something. In a room with decorative walls and a semicircle shape, men stood and talked. Suddenly a gloved hand touched the back of one of the men. The man couldn't believe his eyes when he saw the main character in front of him. Lady Roussel, he greeted, shocked by such an unexpected meeting. She explained that it was her first time at the club and that the gentleman could show her to the exit. It was Baron de Laporte, owner of the bank in the city of Lutz and a former senator. The Jockey Club was home to the most noble families of the empire, those who are at the very heart of power and wealth. Freya understood that there were more than enough spectators, and then turned to the Baron. The man was flattered that such a noble person as Lady Roussel knew about him. She turned to him because there was no one else to ask. In front of the club members, the heir to the title put an end to rumors of discord with her father. But the girl was not embarrassed by the predatory glances of the visitors. The former senator was curious what this young lady wanted to know from him. She said her husband was very concerned about the railroad law and wanted to find out for himself what would change. The Baron found it strange that Freya openly admitted that she had been rummaging through her husband's affairs. "Lady, now is not the time for such talk." Draforth tried to make an excuse. The heroine pretended not to understand where she had embarrassed herself and tried to continue speaking. The man interrupted her, asking her to remain silent and not to discuss such important things here. He noticed how people started whispering behind his back, obviously because of his insolent behavior. The lady, despite her interlocutor's reaction, continued to discuss the difference in transportation prices. It turned out that the law demanded too much from rail transport. Even sea transport would be cheaper, she said. There is no one in this building who does not understand what this bill is leading to. The girl said that she didn't understand the law well, but she really wanted to help her husband. The Baron realized that this was an attempt to push through his own interests and repeal the amendment. He felt sorry for the young lady because her father did not recognize her and her husband did not love her. Dreyfort suggested that she turn to Duke Blanc, as he would be a better fit. Freya became embarrassed and said that she hadn't thought of it right away. This behavior confused the gentleman and reminded him of his son, who made a similar facial expression. He said that one should be careful with such matters and only contact those who understand them. The man drinking wine noted that the girl was behaving very stupidly. The Baron turned around, thinking he had done all he could, but the lady lured him into a trap by pretending to be an empty-headed fool. Max asked what happened, but the girl replied that the conversation simply didn't work out. He said that this happens, but Freya wanted to meet the Baron again. The husband asked why she needed all this. She deliberately staged this scene in front of key politicians, where de Laporte rejected her, to instill confidence that Assel Dreyfort would never accept her hand. She assumed that the man felt awkward because her father was nearby, but the Baron claimed that he himself came to the club first, Max noted. If he had felt awkward, he most likely would not have come. Mr. Roussel asked what his wife was thinking about right now. Freya blushed and did not understand what exactly her husband wanted to hear. He wondered what they were talking about with his father. Maybe they were planning something. The girl understood what the guy was getting at. He clearly didn't trust her. The lady thought everything was going smoothly, but she missed the most important thing. The road is still long, and the husband will continue to encounter similar situations and doubt each time. She told Max to listen very carefully because she would only answer this question once, so he needed to remember it well. Whenever doubts creep in, remember these words: everything she has done today and will do in the future, only for him. Her husband's face changed. No matter what Freya said, the guy's mistrust could not be removed so easily. The lady understood that it was really difficult to believe sooner or later a moment of doubt would come. She asked him to just trust her, because she would lead him out of the darkness. It was her turn to help. The girl reminded Max that she was very happy when he took her hand. This is all just to bring back that very joy of life to him. All she really wanted was one thing: to get her prince out of his hellish life. That's why she asked me to believe her, at least now. Everything turned out as his father said. No one remained next to Max except his wife. Freya felt relieved. Now her husband had no choice but to accept her again. And the divorce, and the husband who said he loved another, his business, which she destroyed with her own hands, everyone will forget and start living again. The lady would not stumble and would keep the love of her life. She believed in it. The image of Max's death appeared before the girl's eyes again. She remembered how she tried to catch up with her falling husband, running after him in tears. The doctor asked how Freya was feeling today. It was as if she had woken up from a nightmare that seemed real, the lady said. The doctor said that human memory does not just disappear, and asked me to imagine everything, down to the smallest detail. In order to forget a single memory stored in a memory cell, you need to experience as many emotions as possible. With the help of hypnosis, he will gradually dissolve the feelings that she was experiencing. And over time, it will be forgotten, just like the food you ate a week ago. The doctor asked whether the girl was ready to part with these memories. If they are erased, a huge void will remain, and it is unknown what side effects will appear. Freya asked me not to worry and just do my job. She understood perfectly well what consequences this would lead to and what risks it carried. She asked the doctor if he would believe her if she told him that she had already erased memories. The spring of her 22 years was a time of torment. She was mocked outside, so she locked herself in her bedroom and drowned the time in tears. With each passing day, her insomnia and hysterics grew stronger, and on those rare days when Max showed up at home, she hung on him to the point of exhaustion. She said she didn't remember the first 2 weeks of that May. The girl added that she had been told that she was easily influenced. The doctor asked who dared to tell her such a thing. Freya simply remained silent in response to the question posed. The psychiatrist realized that this was not the first time she had come to him for help. Auguste read a newspaper that reported on the start of the construction of the railway. If this venture succeeds, Max will be the first to build a passenger road and expand the enterprise from south to north. Dreyfort asked if the gentleman had managed to find out what his wife was planning. The guy was silent, remembering the conversation with his wife while they were driving home. She said she would lead him out of his hellish life. At that moment, he was overcome with shock, and his thoughts were confused. He thought he was fed up with her antics, but at that moment Freya seemed different to him, not the same as before. Now it was her turn to help, just as he had once helped her. Max couldn't get a word out and was trying to choose what to answer his friend. The gentleman replied that his wife would act for him, to which Auguste objected that she might be in collusion with the Duke. She is going to meet with de Laporte, and her husband has allowed his wife to do as she wishes. Max said that if she didn't succeed, they wouldn't lose anything. Dreyfort agreed and said that she had helped them a lot. But a rumor spread that Lady Russell had gone to her father for her husband's sake, but the conversation had not gone well in her haste. She had clung to the Baron and disgraced herself. If the Duke interfered with the amendments, then this rumor would sow discord, the gentleman reasoned. The wife's reputation fell even lower, but all these events played into the hands of the young people. Now both the nobility and businessmen wondered how the behavior of the Duke's daughter would affect his decision. This meant that the chances of the bill being revised had increased, which was good news. Max knew Freya had done a much better job than he could have imagined. Everything was going for the better, but for some reason, the gentleman was not very happy about it. Auguste asked, asking not to be considered rude, whether Max still had feelings for his wife. Mr. Roussel thought for a moment. He had already gone too far to harbor such feelings in his soul. The prince who dreamed of saving his princess turned into a scoundrel selling marriage, and the princess turned into a madwoman spying on her husband. They say Freya has decided to skip work this week, Auguste asked. She had barely served a week when she decided not to show up for the next one, as if it was just a game for her. If Lady Roussel inherited the title alone, she would have to manage the affairs, Max noted, to which Dreyfort objected, how could Freya Blanc be left alone? She can't just turn from Lady Roussel into Lady whatever. The gentleman decided to clarify what his friend was trying to convey to him. Auguste continued, the Duke will not leave his daughter in the state of a divorcee. You see, before the ink is even dry on the divorce papers, a new marriage entry will already be entered into the registry. The husband thought that after the divorce, Freya would be left alone, locked in the Blanc house. Whatever she is planning, the Duke will not leave the girl alone. Max was again lost in his thoughts. But Dreyfort did not allow us to relax, continuing the dialogue. That person who will soon become a divorcee, what is she doing if she doesn't even go to work? Asked the gray-haired guy. Freya saw in the newspaper report that Max had made the first move, and that the whole business was a battle for finances. The original plan was for Tristan to secure investments, but the girl didn't like that plan. In order to keep Erler in check, the Lutetia Bank must be drawn into this matter by any means necessary. The place where she wanted to capture the carefree animal would be the Longchamp racecourse, where the next races would take place. Unlike last time, this time she will act independently, so she needs to prepare thoroughly. That time she tearfully asked for help, but now the plan will be completely different. Freya stood and looked at the painting hanging on the wall of her bedroom. It depicts Sisyphus, who after his death was condemned by the gods to roll a heavy stone up a mountain, which, having barely reached the top, rolled down again and again. What kind of paintings did the girl like? Asked the husband as he entered. Max stood in his pajamas and robe, his head slightly bowed. The husband, who was constantly distant, who had not come here even once in 5 years, crossed the threshold of Freya's bedroom for the second time. That's how simple it turned out to be. As soon as she distanced herself, her husband began to visit her, the lady realized. Max started asking her why she liked this painting and what she bought at the exhibition. She did not dare to reveal the true meaning of this work, and even if he heard it, he would not believe it. The girl thought that he did not know the cliff depicted on the paper, but Max quickly declared that it was the Cliff of Lovers. Looking into his eyes, she asked how he knew this place. He stated that he knew the area around the Castle Blanc much better than she did. When Max was 12, by order of the Duke, he entered the royal school, after which he spent his holidays at the Blanc Castle. Like a cuckoo, appearing at the right time and in the right place, he lived to please the lady. He heard that if lovers stand on this cliff and take an oath, their love will become eternal. Max wanted to bring the girl to this place to renounce the name Blanc and secretly run away together. But this would have broken the agreement with the Duke, and besides, he did not know what Freya would answer to such a proposal. The little gentleman often imagined how they would escape with their princess. They buy a house and live a quiet and peaceful life in it. They cook together, laugh, and simply enjoy the little things, like ordinary people. Only dreams of an unrealizable future helped him survive all these years in a school and a castle, where he was completely ignored. Freya asked why her husband had visited her again. Perhaps he was so interested in the painting. But he himself did not understand how he ended up here. From a certain point on, the guy dreamed only of escaping from Blanc's house, and now he's returning himself. and it was beyond his power to understand why he was so drawn back. Today an article about the project's launch came out, and tomorrow shares will be sold on the stock exchange, and anyone will be able to buy them. Freya said that she was just about to do this. Max asked why she needed this and wondered if she was deliberately trying to look suspicious. The girl was also a business partner, and where else could she find such a profitable offer, she voiced. The gentleman did not understand whether the Duke had ordered her to do this, or whether he had told her how the canal business had turned into a fraud. An image of his wife appeared in his head, asking him to trust her, because she would lead him out of hell. Max was increasingly overcome with doubts. If only she knew what it meant for a guy to trust her. Did he really still have feelings for his wife? The image of Auguste flashed in the gentleman's head. Max said to do as the lady wishes. Having said goodbye, he turned to leave. Freya thanked him for his visit. But something was bothering her, something unspoken between them. The girl called out to her departing husband. For a moment he imagined the image of that past Freya, crying over every little thing. He turned around with frightened eyes. But the mirage suddenly disappeared. The wife asked if her husband had loved her even for a moment. Max wondered if he really loved her. Freya stood silently, waiting for an answer. He understood that all his emotions were just a lie, but when he was freed from what held him captive, perhaps they would be together, and he reminded that the girl had promised to get him out of here. Turning around, he wished success in this matter and finally left the room. At the exit, Max was met by his mother, who seemed to have been watching over him this whole time. She had a conversation with her son. Madame asked if he was busy at the moment. She asked to attend the opening of her salon, which will take place this Saturday. Everyone will be glad to see him at such an event. Max felt disgusted. She knew that the project had been launched, but she believed that even on such a day her affairs would be more important. The mother waited for the boy's answer with a grin. But their unity was interrupted by a maid who asked why they were standing near the lady's bedroom. Perhaps they wanted to visit, but the gentleman said that he had just left his wife's place and then asked his mother to go to his office. The lady mentioned that she simply didn't want to distract her son, but if he insisted, she would be happy to go with him. After all, this is the first salon under the name Roussel, so the owner of the house should have come to the opening, Matilda continued. They say Max started showing up too often around Freya, and Madame decided to announce her son's participation in the opening herself. The gentleman apologized and said that he would not be able to come because he had too much work at the moment. Matilda objected, wondering how her son had time to visit his wife, but not for a short greeting at such an important event. Max replied that he had come to discuss company affairs. His mother did not understand what could be discussed with her, but she did not argue. The master warned his mother for the last time not to interfere in matters with Freya. It would be better for her. Mother began to scream that the master did not understand how much she had suffered, indulging the girl's every whim, and now he was offended because of the decision to send her to the hospital. Mr. Roussel asked to calm down and not start this conversation again. The mother said that she would no longer pay attention to her, even if the guy begged for it. What follows is a conversation between the madam and the butler, whom she asked if he had noticed anything strange between the spouses recently. He replied that there was nothing special. Matilda accepted the answer, but asked that all the couple's actions be closely monitored and reported to her. The lady thought about what she heard in the heroine's room. It was a signal that the relationship between her son and daughter-in-law had changed. If she understands what Max meant, she will not only show Freya her place, but also subjugate her. But the phrase, "take away from here," where, so that it could mean. There was a knock at the door. It was the maid. When she entered, she said that Madam and Master were outside. Freya didn't pay attention and stood looking at the painting. To choose death, leaving a loved one, in a place where they call for eternal love, what could this mean? The lady asked Mila. The lady continued to think about this and could not stop. She thought that the place of Max's death was accidental, but if he knew the legend, then most likely he deliberately chose this cliff. He wanted to say goodbye to her forever, in the place where everyone prays for love. He prayed for separation, the girl realized. Freya asked the maid what she should do. It seems she couldn't even fulfill his last wish, the heroine said with tears in her eyes. And although Mila did not quite understand what the lady was saying, she said that if someone dies in a place where they take an oath of eternal love, maybe this means that even after death he wants to be with his loved one again. 6 months after her husband's death, Freya climbed that cliff again, at least to be with him like that. She wanted to stay there, but if Max was praying there for eternal separation, then until this hell ends, his wish will not come true. Delaporte was congratulated on his stunning performance at the races, beaming with joy and embarrassment. The moment he crossed the finish line first by a minimal margin, everyone was simply delighted, to which the Baron joked about his incredible luck. Someone behind the man's back was whispering and mocking, which caught his attention. Two of the nobles spoke of how Lady Russell had groveled before the bank manager, reproaching him for having acted much more kindly. Delaporte understood what was going on. They thought that Duke Blanc had renounced his daughter, but this was far from the case. As soon as the lady entered the jockey club openly, it should have become clear to everyone that the relationship between them had changed. However, if they had even a drop of clarity, they would not be talking such nonsense. Who would have thought that because of one mistake Freya would turn from white saffron into a roadside weed, the man thought. At school, Max hid like a rat behind a Gust Drafor, and now he walks around with his nose in the air. The Baron was struck by such caustic words, and he decided to eavesdrop on this conversation. The men continued to mock Mr. Roussel, saying that he had barely finished school and had even served in the army. The imperial school was only a stepping stone for nobles seeking glory in the army, but the fate of the descendant of a revolutionary hero was sealed. Delaporte understood that these idiots were simply talking nonsense that made no sense. In an era when the nobility and the bourgeoisie maintain a balance, publicly humiliating a man who raised a ruined business and expanded the railways is too much. Someone continued, asking if it was true that the bank director was an Ashran. The Empire secretly despised the Ashran, and when rumors began to spread that they were helping the revolutionaries, they began to belittle them even more. The Baron was offended by such statements, but he had no intention of taking any action yet. Another man argued that the bank's director had been appointed by the Emperor himself, so doubting his loyalty was the same as not trusting His Majesty. The women were discussing the girl who had entered the jockey club, saying how indecent it was. Delaporte was irritated by the rumors and unfounded accusations that began to circulate about him, but among these idiots he noticed a familiar face approaching the crowd. It was Marquis Tristan. It was strange that he came to the hippodrome, thought the Baron. Those present did not understand the purpose of the guy's appearance. They thought it was probably because of the amendments to the law. The royalists profited from the canals, not the railways, among them the Duke of Blanc, the irony being that the canals were handed over to the Duke by Max Roussel himself. It looked like a struggle between Republicans and Royalists, but when the Marquis Tristan got involved in the railways, it degenerated into a confrontation between the aristocratic party and the Emperor. I wonder if young Erler realizes that he has put his head in the mouth of a white lion, thought Delaporte. The bank director suddenly noticed a silhouette in a cloak in his carriage. The seated man congratulated the gentleman on his incredible victory at the races. The Baron, shouting, asked who this man was and ordered him to leave the carriage immediately. But as soon as the mysterious person removed the hood, he realized who was in front of him. In the carriage was Lady Roussel, who was smiling sweetly and looking at the stunned man. He was going to throw her out without even asking why she had come, Freya asked. Delaporte said that if she had come to talk about the law, then he could do nothing to help. The man wanted to put pressure on her, like last time, so that she would leave the carriage and run away. But the Baron was at a disadvantage if they saw him. It would be bad for both of them. The girl sat silently and waited for the opportunity to continue the conversation. Baron Delaporte, she began. The man didn't understand what to do. It was a dead end for him. Freya reminded him that he had no right to forcefully pull an imperial person out of the carriage, so if he wants to finish quickly, he needs to listen to her proposal. The director thought that she was just a flighty girl who didn't understand where she was sticking her nose, but apparently he was wrong. She was smarter than she seemed, but Delaporte couldn't understand whether all this was a deliberate deception. The man repeated that he could do nothing about the amendments, but Freya was against it, saying that he would help to ruin the project. Duke Blanc supported this law. He simply could not understand what he could do in such a situation. The Baron repeated that it was beyond his powers. Let her turn to her father. The heroine said that if we were talking about transporting goods, then no, she wouldn't have helped in any way. But should it work with transporting passengers, or was she mistaken? The girl asked. Could this lady be trying to negotiate aggressively? Delaporte could not believe it. The man asked who had sent her, and if anyone wanted to make a deal with him, they should come out of the shadows and talk to him in person. The Baron realized that the Marquis had not just appeared, and was watching nearby. The young head of the family had come up with a good plan. But Freya refuted the gentleman's guesses. No one would come here, she said. There is only her and the bank director here. The girl is his partner in the deal. And now, for the third time, he fell for this trick. Underestimated the lady again? This is an obvious mistake. He agreed that he could influence the transportation, but for him, it was a huge risk. What was the reward for the work? The Baron asked. The heroine asked the man what he wanted, and he thought about it, realizing that Dom Blanc doesn't throw words to the wind. The man requested the rights to develop mines belonging to the ducal house. Freya said that this was difficult because the mines were already connected by other contacts, but she can offer a reward that de Laporte will certainly not refuse. The girl asked him if he had ever heard a very interesting rumor, that if they had not financed the revolution, it would have failed. The man was caught off guard. Freya felt completely superior to her opponent. The Asheran people poured their wealth into the revolutionary army in order to escape a life of contempt. But the republic they had won back collapsed twice before their eyes, the girl continued. How deep was the disappointment when the secrets of the Drafort family and his line were revealed, and the empire was once again engulfed in a revolutionary whirlwind. In the lady's repeated lives, Baron de Laporte has always been the protagonist of the Third Revolution and the hero of the Republic, so she must make him her ally. Why did Auguste, who hated aristocrats, go to the imperial school? Freya asked. Perhaps his original goal was to create a second Max Roussel, the heroine suggested. True, the plan failed, because it is impossible to make the son-in-law of the most influential family of the empire the symbol of the new revolutionary army. The Baron jumped up and with a sharp movement of his hand put the knife to Freya's throat. From whom could the lady have obtained this information? De Laporte asked nervously. The knife cut through the girl's skin millimeter by millimeter, sparkling from the rays of the sun that had seeped through. The heroine firmly stated that Benoit Roussel told all this. It couldn't be, but it was impossible to find him now, so it was also impossible to verify the truth. The man understood. The gentleman asked who else knew about this information. Freya said that no one knew. If she had let it slip, the Baron would now be dealing not with her, but with her father. Drafort asked her for what purpose she was saying all this. The heroine replied that she was simply trying to save her husband and asked him to help her. The lady also added that she knows in whose hands Benoit Roussel's channel project was on the verge of collapse. The Baron realized that he couldn't get out of this so easily. The lady knew too much. He removed the knife from Freya's neck and realized that she was hiding one trick in another. In recent years, the most dangerous and cunning opponent has turned out to be a girl in her early 20s. Simply keeping silent is not enough, de Laporte said. Freya said that if he helps, he will get what he wants. Drafort asked what she meant by desired, but the lady remained silent. A realization came to him. Ms. Roussel speaks of the spark of the Third Revolution. Auguste asked why Max's wife hadn't shown up for work today either, even though he knew that studying business wasn't for her. Mr. Roussel muttered something unintelligible about the dress his wife had worn that morning. Coming to his senses suddenly, he asked when the imperial ball would be, and received the answer the last Friday of this month. The guy thought for a moment and said that he needed to step away for a while. Drafort asked where his colleague was going. Max replied that he would go to the jeweler on Place Vanton. Freya said that an invitation to the ball had arrived and asked her husband to go with her. He agreed. Besides, she won't be at work today, she'll go order a dress. Max told her to do as she wanted. He noticed something strange out of the corner of his eye and grabbed Freya by the shoulders, pulling her towards him. Freya was scared, nervously trying to find out what had happened. The husband noticed a cut on the girl's neck. She understood what her husband had noticed and tried to explain where the scratch came from. The lady asked not to be scared. She was at the racetrack and then got caught on a branch when she was returning home. Max didn't pay attention to his wife's words. It was a very thin cut, and judging by the depth and evenness of the wound, it was the work of someone who skillfully wielded a blade. The question rose in his throat as to who did this, but the gentleman did not voice it. It was too late to pretend to be his husband. The guy wanted to give her jewelry, but if you think about it, she never asked for anything like that. But he wanted to at least somehow mark her coming out. This cut haunted the gentleman. He stopped himself with the thought, so what if it's just a scratch? In war, even worse things happened all the time. Auguste voiced that sometimes he doesn't understand Max's actions at all, and then immediately asked how the meeting between Freya and Baron de Laporte went. Mr. Roussel replied that they had met, but apparently to no avail. Draforth's sarcasm had soared, as he had said that nothing would come of it. Buying a necklace is an impulsive decision, but after all, it's his wife's first ball and possibly the last ball Max will go to with her. During the engagement, he followed the plan. After the wedding, he saved the business, and after its loss, he created a new one. There were many worries, but the master had never given Freya gifts, and now he suddenly decided to do so. The girl greeted the new visitor and asked if he was looking for something special. Max asked to see the emeralds that were available. The saleswoman asked if it was a gift for someone special. The guy agreed. He added that he wanted to buy a necklace for his wife, and the girl said that it was very romantic and immediately went to look for exquisite pieces. This store sold only high-quality emeralds if desired. They could make a custom-made piece of jewelry, the lady noted. Mr. Roussel's gaze was drawn to a necklace with bows and earrings in a gold frame with small diamonds and white stones. The emeralds that were at the heart of these decorations reminded the guy of the eyes of his beloved. He finally chose this set. The seller praised the gentleman's taste, saying that this set was made by a skilled master of the imperial court. The girl also asked me to give her address, and they would deliver